Hi everybody, it's Sarah from the PT department, and I am going to read you a story today called Growing Up Grizzly. It is a true story about Bailey and her cubs, and it is by Amy Shapira. In southeastern Alaska, a wild forest grows between the mountains and the sea. In the middle of this forest shines a lake, and on one end of the lake is a cozy, hidden-away cove. More than 20 grizzly bears come here every summer when the cove's fresh waters are full of swimming salmon. Grizzlies love to catch these silvery fish. Eating lots of salmon is important to keep big bear bellies full and help small bears grow up healthy and strong. One day, out by the ocean's edge, a grizzly bear came walking along a beach. From there, he followed a long river through the forest all the way to the lake. Then he walked around the lake and into the cove. He traveled by himself the whole time. The people who watched grizzlies at the cove had never seen this bear before. Nobody knew where he first started his journey or how many days he had been walking. No one knew much about him at all, except that he didn't want to travel any farther. He stayed around the cove, and after a while, people started to call this bear Emmett. Emmett wasn't a little cub. He wasn't a yearling cub either. He was 2 years old. That's when grizzly bears usually leave home. Emmett was old enough to live on his own, but he didn't seem to want to. Maybe he wasn't sure what to do now that he was away from his old family and the place where he grew up. Sometimes he wore a goofy look on his face. Most of the time, he just looked lost and lonely. Emmett would play with trees. He found a bucket and played with it. When Emmett saw his reflection in the window of an old cabin, he played with that too. This young grizzly really needed a friend. Other grizzlies were visiting the cove at the same time. One family of 4 bears fished and played there nearly every day. People called the mother Bailey. She had 3 new cubs that people named Eleanor, Misha, and James. Eleanor, the smallest cub, was quiet and shy. Her brother James was the biggest cub. He was also the friendliest. Misha, the middle-sized cub, was the busiest and the noisiest. Misha had enough energy for 2 baby bears. Even when Misha was resting, you could tell from his look that he was ready to do something, like grab onto his toes and roll down a hill, making all kinds of little grizzly grumbles and growls. Emmett spent hour after hour following Bailey's family around. He stared and stared at her and her 3 cubs, Eleanor, James, and Misha. Emmett was growing fast, but he wasn't quite ready to be grown up. What he wanted more than anything else was to join in the family's fun. Bailey wrestled and tumbled with her cubs. She cuddled them and kept watch to be sure they didn't wander too far. She was one of the gentlest bears in the cove. But every time Emmett walked near, Bailey would growl and make him go away. Even the nicest mother grizzlies don't like anything or anybody to bother their babies. So whenever the family went somewhere together, all Emmett could do was follow far behind and watch. And watch some more, and wait and hope, while Bailey's cubs got to explore places and chase ducks and romp in the grass side by side. Bailey's cubs were too little to catch salmon for themselves. Bailey had to catch fish for them. One afternoon, she left her cubs on the shore and went to her favorite rock to look for salmon in the water below. She saw a salmon far from the edge and made a great big grizzly bear dive. She got it. While she was away, Emmett had come over to where the cubs were waiting for their mother. The 3 little bears sniffed Emmett and made room for him. Just like that, they became friends. So when Bailey returned, she found 4 young bears standing together instead of 3. Bailey didn't growl or roar. She didn't chase Emmett away. This time she let him stay. In the days that followed, Bailey brought Emmett fish and let him drink her milk. She played with him just like she played with her other cubs. No one ever heard of a mother grizzly bear doing this before, but every grizzly is a little bit different from every other one. Emmett must have been very glad that this is true. Walking beside Bailey and her cubs, he was a happy-looking bear. He had found a family. Bailey needed a few more naps than usual. Taking care of 4 grizzly cubs, including a big one, would make anybody tired once in a while. Soon it was fall. Most of the salmon left the cove. The grizzlies began moving away into the forest, looking for sweet berries and roots to eat. Bailey and her cubs left too. When they traveled among the tall trees and mountainsides, they took Emmett with them because the lonely bear from far away was part of the family now. The days turned colder, and before long it was time to spend the winter resting. Bailey dug a den deep into the ground and put soft tree branches on the floor. Emmett snuggled up beside her, and the cubs in this bare bedroom, while deep snow turned the world outside white and hushed. He had a long, warm, wonderful sleep. Another summer came. Many of the bears that lived in the forest came back to the cove to fish. Bailey returned to the cove with her family. All of the young bears with her had grown up, especially Emmett. His muscles were thicker, his claws were longer, his nose was also getting longer. He could tell about all kinds of things that were going on far away just by smelling the wind, the same as grown-up grizzlies do. Eleanor was still the smallest cub and just a little bit shy. James was still the biggest, friendliest cub. Misha, the middle-sized cub, was still the busiest, ready as always to play or pounce. Bailey had to catch fish for all of them. She didn't seem to mind, even though Emmett was 3 years old now and almost as tall as she was. Some days, Emmett wandered off on his own to explore. He still liked to play with trees. Once in a while, he would get so busy rolling over rocks or digging holes that he forgot where his new family was. As soon as Emmett saw he was alone again, he would start to bawl. Bailey, the mother with the extra big heart, would go over to find him. Her cubs would gather around Emmett and make him feel at home once again. All the cubs and Emmett wrestled with each other. They all wrestled with Bailey too. Sometimes it looked like real fighting, but it never was. It was pretend fighting. Grizzlies like to roughhouse this way. Young bears got to practice using the speed and strength they need to survive in wild places. They also learn how to be careful with their power so they won't hurt any playmates. No matter how much pretend fighting they did, everyone in the family took good care of each other and stayed friends all summer long. When the leaves started to turn autumn colors, the Grizzly family of 5 left the cove to find berries in the forest. They dug tasty roots from the ground while the weather grew frosty and the first snowflakes fell from the clouds. Then, with their tummies full, the bears had another good long rest in a den. Emmett snuggled in next to Bailey and the cubs just like the winter before. The next summer, Bailey was one of the first bears to arrive in the cove, but this year she came without her cubs. Bailey's cubs were 2-year-old bears now. The time had come for them to stop following their mother and begin to live life on their own. Misha was there in another part of the cove, full of his usual energy. He was having no trouble catching salmon by himself. Eleanor was there. She wasn't small anymore. She was turning into such a big grizzly that she was starting to look like her mother. Sometimes Eleanor was by herself and sometimes with her brother Misha. And sometimes she was with her brother James. James would go diving to get fish like he used to watch his mother do. Then he would shake himself dry. Finally, there was Emmett. Taller and heavier and stronger than ever. He still looked sort of goofy now and then. Sometimes he even looked a little like the 2-legged animals called people. But he didn't look worried about being alone anymore. Emmett was going to leave the cove before long. Maybe he would come back to visit the cove next summer, or perhaps he would move on to live in another part of the wild Alaskan forest between the mountains and the sea. No one could say for sure, but everybody could tell that Emmett was ready to take his own place in the world and be a grown-up grizzly bear at last, thanks to one kind mother named Bailey and 3 friendly cubs. These are all real bears, and this is a true story about their lives. It happened just this way from the beginning to the end. The end.